A battered suitcase rolled onto the shore of Fort Lauderdale Beach just after dawn, carried in by waves that had battered the coastline all night. Seaweed clung to the worn leather edges, and the zipper was corroded with rust. A jogger spotted it first, thinking it might be debris. But as she unzipped it, water and the faint scent of mildew escaped. Inside, among warped clothes and ruined photographs, lay a child's drawing, crumpled, slightly faded, but unmistakably signed. Ethan Hale, 2014. It was a simple crayon sketch of a ship, the ocean stretching wide and blue, with a dark figure near the bow, towering and vague, marked with a single word, Zeke. And in the corner, a smiling boy with big, scribbled eyes, waving. 11 years had passed since Ethan Hale vanished on a family cruise. 11 years without a trace. If this mystery grabs your heart, subscribe now. We're just getting started. And the truth only gets stranger. Back in 2014, the Hales had boarded the Azure Star for a week-long Caribbean cruise. It was their first family vacation in years, a chance to reconnect after Lucas Hale's recent work promotion and Margot's endless string of night shifts at the hospital. Their son, Ethan, 7 years old, was obsessed with the idea of the ocean. Drawings of fish, submarines, sea creatures lined his bedroom walls. He carried a sketchpad with him everywhere. From the moment they boarded, Ethan was enthralled. The towering decks, the winding corridors, the glimmering pools, it was a floating city of wonder. Crew members adored him. He would sit near the main buffet sketching people he saw, asking passengers where they came from, what adventures they'd had. One crewman even gave him a small set of professional colored pencils from the ship's boutique. "For your masterpiece," he'd said with a wink. Margot watched him closely, never letting him out of her sight for long. Lucas, meanwhile, buried himself in emails, pacing near the balcony with his phone pressed to his ear. Their conversations were often curt. Margot wanted him present. Lucas insisted he needed to manage a crisis back home. Still, they had moments. A night of dancing, a family dinner under lantern lights, and then on the 5th evening, the costume party. Ethan had insisted on dressing as a pirate, complete with an eye patch and a toy sword. The ballroom shimmered with lights, the buffet was endless, and laughter echoed from every corner. Margot and Lucas danced for the first time in months, checking on Ethan occasionally as he played near the stage with a group of kids. When they looked again, he was gone. At first it was easy to dismiss. He was likely in the bathroom, or getting another cookie. But minutes turned to 10, then 20. Margot began to ask other parents. A hostess offered to make an announcement over the speaker. Lucas checked their cabin. Nothing. Then panic set in. Security was alerted. The ship initiated protocol. Public announcements. All exits secured. Staff instructed to search every deck, every hallway, every closet. The ship's captain appeared, his face tense, assuring the Hales that children sometimes wandered and were almost always found quickly. But the hours dragged on. The costume party ended, lights dimmed, and still no sign of Ethan. His sketchpad was found near the lounge bar, one page torn, the last drawing half finished, a dark hallway, a door, and the figure labeled Zeke. By morning, the Azure Star docked at the nearest port. Local authorities and FBI agents were brought in. Passengers were questioned. Video surveillance from public areas reviewed. But there was no footage of Ethan beyond the party. No one remembered seeing him leave. No suspicious adults. No evidence of struggle. Just absence. Margot's voice went hoarse from screaming his name. Lucas collapsed in their cabin, face buried in his hands. Media began to swarm the port. Reporters speculated endlessly. Had he fallen overboard? Wandered into the engine room? Been taken? Divers searched the waters around the ship. Dogs combed the decks. Every theory felt more desperate than the last. Margot refused to leave the ship for days, convinced Ethan was still aboard, hidden somewhere. Lucas, numb and broken, begged her to accept the possibility he was gone. But Margot wouldn't accept it, not then, not ever. Back on the beach in the present day, Lena Alvarez, the journalist who found the suitcase, held the drawing in her gloved hands. The edges were curled. The name was faint but legible. The date? July 18th, 2014. The night Ethan vanished. She glanced out to sea. Something about the smile in the drawing felt hauntingly fresh, like the boy who made it had never stopped waiting. The Azure Star was held in port for 48 hours after Ethan's disappearance. Passengers were forced to remain on board or nearby as authorities scoured every inch of the vessel. FBI agents arrived swiftly, their expressions grim as they reviewed surveillance footage, collected testimonies and diagrammed possible scenarios. Still no sign of Ethan. Detective Serena Bosch was assigned as the lead investigator. A veteran of child abduction cases, she had a reputation for results, but also for bluntness. She walked the ship's hallways with purpose, studied the deck layouts, and interviewed every crew member and child who'd attended the costume party. When she entered the Hales cabin, she found Margot sitting stiffly on the edge of the bed, eyes red from crying, Ethan's sketchpad clutched in her lap. Lucas stood in the corner, arms crossed, face expressionless. His gaze never quite met Margot's. Bosch noted the tension instantly. "I want you to tell me everything," she said. Start with that night. Margot recounted the party in detail, Ethan's excitement, the pirate costume, the colored pencils from the friendly crewman. She described the moment she realized he was gone, the frantic search, the tear in her voice when no one responded to the announcements. Lucas added little. "Kids wander off," he muttered. "It was a huge ship. Maybe." "He just went somewhere he shouldn't have." Bosch asked to see the sketchpad. Margot handed it over, flipping to the final drawing Ethan made before he vanished. The hallway, the door, the looming figure with the word Zeke. Bosch's brow furrowed. "Did Ethan ever mention this Zeke before?" Margot shook her head. "No, but he drew him a few times. Sometimes in the background, always shadowy. He said Zeke lived under the ship. I thought it was just his imagination." Bosch didn't dismiss it. She knew children often expressed trauma through art, and this figure had appeared multiple times. That meant something. The investigation progressed, but the evidence was thin. Cameras showed Ethan running toward the lower deck stairwell around 9:13 p.m. After that, he vanished. No footage of him leaving, no signs of struggle, no witnesses. Divers searched the water for days, nothing. The news spread fast. Headlines splashed across every major outlet. "Boy vanishes at sea." "Mystery on the high seas. Ethan Hale still missing." Comment sections brimmed with wild theories, abduction, accident, even supernatural speculations. Talk shows debated cruise ship safety. Politicians gave hollow condolences, but none of it brought Ethan back. Margot couldn't sleep. She walked the decks at night, calling his name. She confronted staff. She begged Bosch not to stop looking. Lucas, on the other hand, shut down entirely. He left the ship early, unable to bear the pressure. He gave one press statement, choked, brief, then disappeared from the spotlight. Bosch remained. She combed through the ship's logs, looking for anything out of place. She interviewed crew about the maintenance areas, the sealed compartments, anything not shown on public maps. Some were cooperative, others tight-lipped. One engineer told her quietly, "There are places even we're told not to go." That comment stuck with her. She tracked Ethan's movements from the security logs, mapping his usual patterns. He'd spent a lot of time near the game room, the library, and the observation deck. But twice, he was seen heading toward Deck 3, where only staff were allowed. No one knew why. Bosch had hoped for answers. Instead, she hit walls. The cruise line grew cold. Lawyers got involved. Statements were carefully worded. "We remain deeply saddened. Full cooperation with authorities." But behind closed doors they were done talking. Eventually the ship sailed again. The case turned cold. Margot refused to let go. She hired private investigators, tracked down other passengers. She believed Ethan was alive, that someone on that ship had taken him and hidden him. She even accused a crew member publicly, a young man who'd been kind to Ethan, but there was no proof. Lucas withdrew completely. He filed for separation within the year. Margot fought it, begged him to stay united, but his mind was made up. "He's gone, Margot," he said during their final meeting. "We have to accept it. You have to. She couldn't. Every fiber of her being told her that Ethan was still out there, and every time she looked at his last drawing, with that dark figure labeled Zeke, a chill ran down her spine. She believed it was a clue, not a coincidence. Detective Bosch took the sketchpad home with her. Even after the case was archived and her superiors told her to move on, she kept it in a drawer near her desk. Some nights she'd pull it out and study the figure. Something about it lingered in her mind, more unsettling than any other case she'd worked. She didn't know then that she'd see that figure again, years later on a beach inside a ruined suitcase. And when that day came, all the pain, guilt, and unanswered questions would come roaring back with the tide. The suitcase had clearly been in the ocean a long time. Its zippers were stiff with rust, its lining shredded by salt water. The clothes inside were reduced to pulp, but the drawing, Ethan's drawing, had somehow survived. Lena Alvarez wasn't sure what made her stop when she saw the suitcase on the beach that morning. She was just out for air, shaking off another fruitless assignment and nursing a headache. But something about the way the suitcase sat, half buried in wet sand, felt wrong. It didn't belong. The drawing inside changed everything. She was a freelance journalist, mostly covering crime and missing persons cases. She had read about Ethan Hale years ago, one of those haunting stories you never fully forget, but seeing his name written in crayon on paper that was unmistakably 11 years old sent a shock through her chest. She called the authorities first, as she should. They took the suitcase and promised to examine its contents. But Lena knew how these things went. Red tape, delay, disinterest. She didn't wait. She tracked down Margot Hale within a day. Margot hadn't changed much from the woman the public remembered. Tired eyes, strong jaw, a haunted calm that came from living with a wound that never closed. She opened the door cautiously when Lena knocked, a sliver of her face peeking out. "I'm not giving any more interviews," she said flatly. "I'm not here to exploit you," Lena replied. "I found something, a suitcase on the beach, and inside there was one of Ethan's drawings." For a moment, silence. Then Margot's breath caught, like someone had punched the air from her lungs. The door opened wider. Lena showed her the photo she had taken before handing the drawing over to police. Margot studied it with trembling fingers. The crayon colors, the crooked handwriting. The same signature. She backed away and sat down on the front steps, clutching her chest. "It's him," she whispered. "He's alive. I knew it. I always knew it." It wasn't proof. Not yet. But for Margot, it was enough to rip open everything she had kept tightly buried. She called Lucas the same night. He didn't answer at first. When he finally picked up, his voice was groggy and distant, as if life had moved on too far to ever allow the past back in. "Lucas," she said, "they found one of Ethan's drawings, in a suitcase, washed up in Florida." A pause. "That's not possible," he said. "It's probably a hoax." "It's not," she snapped. "It's real. I know it's his." Silence again. Then a sigh. "I'll come," he said. "Just don't expect me to believe what you believe." He arrived 2 days later, looking older than his years, his suit rumpled, his tie loosened. He didn't hug Margot. They barely exchanged more than a few words, but he sat at the kitchen table while Lena explained everything. The authorities had been vague, confirming that the suitcase had other items consistent with the time Ethan disappeared. One shirt matched those sold on the Azure Star in 2014. The drawing had been authenticated preliminarily. The suitcase itself bore no fingerprints or identifying marks, but it hadn't been floating for 11 years. The canvas was worn, but intact. Someone had kept it, stored it, released it. Lucas still looked doubtful, but less certain than before. It could have been lost years ago. A freak current, a coincidence. Margot slammed her hand on the table. "He's alive, Lucas. That drawing is new. Look at it. It has the same character he drew before. Zeke. You remember Zeke?" Lucas rubbed his temples. "I remember you obsessing over that name. A drawing isn't evidence." But he didn't leave. Margot did one more thing. She reached out to Serena Bosch. The former detective had retired 3 years ago after a long, decorated career. She'd refused interviews about the Ethan Hale case, kept to herself. But when Margot's email arrived, with the scanned image of the new drawing, Bosch drove through the night. She hadn't seen Margot since the early days of the investigation. Her hair had gone fully grey, her step slower, but her eyes still held fire. She studied the drawing in silence for a long time. "This wasn't drawn 11 years ago," she finally said. "The paper's aged, but the crayon lines are too sharp, the colour too fresh. This was drawn more recently." Lucas leaned forward. "Are you saying—" Bosch interrupted. "I'm saying this isn't over, and maybe it never was." The room fell into a hush. Lena sat perfectly still, her recorder off, her notepad forgotten. Margot's hands trembled. "Then help us," she whispered. "Please." Bosch nodded slowly. "I should have never stopped looking." They laid the drawing flat across Margot's dining table, its edges curled, the colours still vivid. A child's sketch, yes, but Bosch saw more. She pulled out a magnifier, adjusted her glasses, and leaned in. "This ship isn't just a random drawing," she said. "It's the Azure Star. The layout is too precise. Look at the upper deck, the lifeboats, even the placement of the smokestacks." Margot had memorized the ship years ago. She nodded, pointing to a section in the lower right corner. "That's the crew quarters. Ethan was never allowed there." "And yet," Bosch replied, "he drew it." "That means he saw it." Lena hovered nearby, taking notes, but mostly watching. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was personal. Every detail in the drawing could be a message. Lucas paced near the window, arms folded. "You're all assuming this was meant as a map." Bosch didn't argue. She traced her finger over the strange shapes along the ship's hull, symbols at first glance but familiar to her trained eye. "They're not just shapes, they're directional indicators. Look, arrows, labels in Ethan's handwriting, even small rooms marked with X's. This is how a child tries to document something important." Margot's voice trembled. "You think he was trying to tell us where he was?" Bosch nodded. "Or where he had been?" The name Zeke appeared again, scrawled in larger, darker lines beside a staircase. Lena leaned in. "He wrote it bigger this time, like he wanted us to notice." They scanned the rest of the page. Near the bottom, in the corner where Ethan often signed his name, was a symbol they hadn't seen before, a crescent moon beside what looked like a cage. It was small, almost hidden. "What does that mean?" Margot whispered. Bosch didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and turned to Lena. "You mentioned you covered maritime disappearances. Have you ever heard the name Zeke before?" Lena frowned. "Not in any official case files, but I've seen it pop up in folklore, seafaring tales, superstition." "Tell me." "In Caribbean lore, there's a figure. Some call him Zeke, others Ezekiel or Zequo. The stories vary. Some say he's a spirit who takes children lost at sea. Others describe him as a man who lives below decks, whispering promises to the lonely." Lucas scoffed. "You can't be serious." Lena ignored him. "The name keeps showing up in old missing persons notes. Children who vanished from ferries, cargo ships, even coastal towns. Some of them mentioned seeing someone named Zeke before they disappeared." Margot covered her mouth. "Ethan said the same thing. He told me once, Zeke doesn't like loud places. He lives where it's quiet." "Underneath." Bosch took a slow breath. "That drawing isn't just memory, it's a trail." And they had only one logical next step. They returned to the Azure Star, now rebranded under a new name, the Celestia Dream. The cruise line had changed ownership, updated the branding, but the ship was the same. Bosch contacted an old friend still working with Port Authority and arranged a walkthrough under the guise of a safety inspection. Margot and Lucas were quiet as they boarded. The smell hit Margot first: salt, cleaning chemicals, distant food. It hadn't changed. Her knees buckled slightly as memories surged. Ethan running down the halls, his laugh echoing. Lena walked beside Bosch, documenting everything. The staff greeted them with trained smiles, but tension lingered beneath the surface. They walked the decks slowly. Bosch took mental notes. The staircase Ethan had drawn was real, and it led to a service corridor not on any tourist map. They asked about it. "Storage only," a crewman said too quickly. "Off limits." Bosch flashed her old credentials. We'll need to see it. The man hesitated. I'll get the manager. They waited 10 minutes. No one returned. Margot's hand clenched. They're hiding something. Lucas spoke up for the first time that day. Or they're just covering for poor organization. But Bosch's gut said otherwise. They explored more, comparing the drawing with the actual layout. Ethan had gotten details right no child should know, like the location of the ship's maintenance shafts or how many steps led to the engine room. Someone had shown him, or he had been there himself. Eventually, a supervisor arrived, polite, professional, and completely evasive. These parts of the ship are under strict regulation, she explained. We can't allow public access without corporate approval. Bosch stepped forward. Then I'll get a warrant. That changed her tone. She led them down one corridor, just enough to appease them, but the deeper they went, the more obvious it became. There were areas that had been sealed off, doors welded shut, locks rusted, places even the crew didn't speak about. As they left the ship that evening, Lena turned to Bosch. He was here, wasn't he? Bosch didn't answer directly. Her eyes lingered on the hull, where the sun had caught something in the paint, an old etching nearly gone. It looked like a crescent moon beside a cage. Detective Bosch spent the next morning requesting access to the Celestia Dream's archived blueprints. Through her remaining contacts in law enforcement, she managed to obtain an older pre-renovation set of engineering diagrams. She spread them out across Lena's living room floor. These corridors here, she said, pointing to thin grey lines running alongside the main decks, don't appear on any guest maps. They're maintenance shafts, narrow, windowless, some with access panels from the crew areas. Margot leaned in. Could a child hide in there? Not without help, Bosch replied, but someone could hide a child. One particular shaft caught her eye. It connected multiple lower-deck rooms, bypassed security checkpoints, and led to a now-defunct storage hold. In Ethan's last known movements, he'd headed in that direction. Lena scrolled through her tablet. I'm going to find someone who worked there back then. She began digging through forums, social media groups for ex-crew members. It took hours, but she found a janitor who'd served on the Azure Star the year Ethan vanished. His name was Grant Rollins. He agreed to meet at a public cafe. Grant looked tired, rough around the edges, the kind of man who'd seen too much and told too little. When Lena showed him the drawing, his hand trembled. I saw something once, he said softly. A month after that kid disappeared. He described a night when he was cleaning near the lower maintenance corridor. He heard a sound, soft, like crying, from behind a locked panel. He reported it. Was told it was probably a rat or pipes. But 2 days later he found a small toy in a vent, a plastic dinosaur. Did you keep it? Bosch asked. No, he said. I handed it in. Never saw it again. Margot's face went pale. Ethan had one just like that. Grant shook his head. I quit soon after. That ship by bad energy, places that felt watched. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lena's investigation turned up more. She began searching databases of missing children, comparing records with cruise logs. It wasn't long before she noticed a pattern. 3 other children had gone missing on cruise ships owned by the same parent company as the Azure Star, now Celestia Dream. All vanished within a span of 15 years. All were between the ages of 6 and 9. All disappearances occurred near the Caribbean route. None were solved. She showed the files to Bosch, who stared in disbelief. No one ever connected these cases? They were treated as isolated. Different ships, different years, but the company never changed. Bosch looked at the list. We may be looking at something much bigger than one boy. Back at her office, Bosch contacted an old tech colleague, someone skilled in video restoration. She handed over a USB drive containing original security footage from the Azure Star, including the night of the costume party. Though the footage was grainy, newer enhancement software might extract what was once missed. 2 days later, the results arrived. The clip was just over 20 seconds long. It showed Ethan at 9:12 p.m., standing near the stairwell. A figure approached him from the side, tall, wearing dark clothing. The child didn't resist. He looked up, nodded, and followed the person down the stairs. No dragging. No struggle. Just quiet obedience. The figure's face was obscured, but Ethan trusted them. Bosch played it again for Lucas. His hands were shaking as he leaned closer to the screen. "He wasn't taken by force," he whispered. Margot watched silently, tears in her eyes. He knew them. Lucas stood slowly. It wasn't an accident. Someone planned this. The final frame of the video showed something else. As the figure turned slightly, a faint symbol could be seen on the back of their jacket. A half-moon crudely drawn. Bosch froze the image. Margot whispered, "The same mark from the drawing." Lucas looked at her. His expression had changed. No longer skepticism, but fury. "Why hasn't this been made public?" "Because it was missed," Bosch replied, "or ignored." Lucas took a deep breath. "Then we stop waiting, we make noise." Margot turned to Lena. "Find the others, parents of those missing kids. If this is a pattern, we need them." Lena nodded, already dialing contacts. Bosch placed the drawing, now sealed in plastic, onto the table. "He wasn't just trying to get home," she said quietly. He was telling us how. After weeks of pressure, Bosch finally secured limited access to the Celestia Dream's restricted zones. The cruise line had resisted fiercely, citing safety protocols and insurance concerns, but the mounting public scrutiny, fueled by Lena's recent article, left them with no choice. They boarded again under strict supervision. Bosch, Margot, Lucas and Lena were accompanied by 2 ship security officers who shadowed them at every turn. Even so, Bosch led them with confidence, tracing the blueprint markings she'd memorized by heart. The air grew colder as they descended. Paint peeled from metal walls, pipes hissed, the corridors narrowed into a single maintenance tunnel where guests were never meant to go. At the end stood a sealed panel. Bosch gestured to the officers. "Open it." They hesitated. One muttered into a radio. After a tense minute, they produced a crowbar and worked the rusted seal loose. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, dark and dust-choked. Margot stepped forward, but Bosch stopped her. "Let me." She climbed inside, flashlight sweeping across the tight chamber. The beam caught something on the wall, marks carved deep into metal, drawings. They were rough, jagged, etched by a child's hand. One showed a sun with a face, the next a stick figure waving behind bars. Another was a ship surrounded by water, with a small arrow pointing downward into a hole. Bosch backed out, heart pounding. "He was here." Margot stared at the panel. "For how long?" They continued deeper into the belly of the ship. Another hidden door was found, this one behind stacked crates in a forgotten storage room. When forced open, it revealed a space the size of a closet, bare except for scratch marks on the floor and a pile of old cloth. Lena crouched. "This was used recently." Lucas, who had remained silent most of the time, leaned against the wall. He was pale. Bosch reached into her bag and pulled out Ethan's drawing again. She matched the symbols on the paper to the layout they now stood in. He was trying to leave a path, and the path wasn't over yet. As they moved to exit, Bosch noticed a small panel near the floor, barely wider than a shoebox. Something about it struck her as odd. She pried it open. Inside was a plastic bag taped to the metal. She pulled it free and opened it with care. Inside, more drawings, 4 sheets, each one slightly damp but legible. The first showed the ship again, this time from beneath. A figure labeled Zeke loomed larger, arms stretched wide. The second was a series of spirals and arrows, like a maze, with a tiny stick figure labeled Me at the center. The third was pure black crayon, scribbled violently over and over. In the middle, written in shaky letters, "Zeke says I'm not ready yet." The final page was a face. Not a child's drawing this time. It was clearer, more deliberate. A man with hollow eyes, long hair, a scar under one cheek. The mouth was drawn as a stitched line. Lena whispered, "He saw him." Bosch turned to the officers. "I need access to your full crew registry, present and past, especially those working maintenance and lower decks in 2014. The senior guard frowned. "That's not something we can—" "You'll get it," Bosch said. "Or I'll have a court order by morning." Lucas moved beside her. "We need to talk to the captain." But it was Margot who walked away first, drawn by something the rest hadn't noticed. In a dark alcove she found another mark, chalked faintly onto the wall, the crescent moon, and next to it a word, exit. Back on land, Bosch took the new drawings to a forensic analyst. She wanted to know if they matched Ethan's style from 11 years ago. The result, same hand, but more mature, stronger grip, recent. Lena sat beside Bosch as they reviewed the findings. "So he's alive?" Bosch didn't answer right away. Her eyes lingered on the phrase, "Zeke says I'm not ready yet." "I don't know if he escaped," she said, "but he wasn't alone, and he wasn't just drawing. He was signaling." Lucas finally spoke. "Why would someone keep him there for years? Why not get rid of him?" No one had an answer. That night, Bosch received an anonymous email. No text, no subject. Just a single image attachment. It was a scanned drawing, different from the others. Cleaner, more recent. It showed a boy standing at sea, looking at the horizon. Behind him, a dark figure held one hand on his shoulder. In the corner, in small, blocky letters, "I'm not gone, I'm learning." Bosch stared at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "What is this becoming?" The recorder was old. Dusty, rectangular, with cracked buttons and a tape already inside. It had been hidden behind a false panel in one of the crawl spaces near the ship's base. Bosch found it while retracing their route, acting on a hunch. She brought it back to Lena's apartment, where they could examine it safely. They pressed play, at first only static, then the faint rustle of movement, like clothes brushing metal. And then a voice, small, unsure. "Okay, it's working. This is Ethan Hale." Margot gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Bosch froze the tape. They played the rest in silence. "I don't know what day it is. I think it's night again. Zeke says time doesn't matter down here." A pause, a breath. I drew more. "Maybe someone will find them." "I think Zeke wants me to stay forever, but I don't want to. I miss Mom. I don't remember Dad's face. That scares me." The tape clicked, paused, then resumed with another segment. "I found a spot where the air smells like salt. I think it leads outside. If I can draw the way, maybe I'll get there." Then, in a whisper, "Zeke says I belong to the sea now." The tape stopped. Margot broke down. She collapsed into Lucas's arms, her body trembling. It was Ethan. Undeniably, unquestionably. The voice of their son, still alive, still hoping. Lucas was silent, overwhelmed. For the first time, all his denial crumbled. He was right there, all this time. Bosch took the recorder to a lab. Forensic techs extracted fingerprints from the casing. Within 48 hours, the results came in. Confirmed match, Ethan Hale. The news hit Bosch like a wave. Proof, not theory, not speculation. Evidence that Ethan had lived, maybe still lived, years after his disappearance. She forwarded the report to the FBI. This time they responded. An agent named Tessa Gray called Bosch personally. "We've been reviewing the material. Your findings match some data from other cold cases." "It may go far beyond this one child." Bosch leaned forward. "Are you suggesting a network?" "There are indicators," Gray said carefully. "But we need more." Within a week, an interagency task force began discreetly collecting cruise line data, particularly related to child disappearances, maintenance crew rosters and internal transfer records. The list of missing children from similar ships grew longer. Lena continued her research. She reached out to families of other victims, building a timeline. Many were shocked, some were suspicious, a few were hostile, but a handful agreed to talk. She created a map, red pins along the Caribbean route. The pattern was unmistakable. Every incident happened along a curve that touched 3 specific ports. Bosch analyzed the route. If they were moving these kids somewhere, they were doing it through those stops. Margot asked the question no one wanted to. Are they still doing it? No one answered. Then the threats began. Lena received the first, an anonymous email with no text, only a file attachment. When she opened it, she found a photo of herself walking to her car, taken from behind. Margot's front window was shattered 2 nights later. No note, no sound, just a rock thrown with precision through the glass. Bosch's phone buzzed during a late meeting, a blocked number. When she answered, a distorted voice said, "Some doors should stay closed." She didn't flinch. "I'm not scared of you." But she was. Still, none of them backed off. They had momentum. They had Ethan's voice, his fingerprints, his drawings, his messages. One night Lena revisited the final sketch again, the boy standing at sea, the figure behind him. Something had bothered her about it, a detail she'd missed. She zoomed in on the figure's chest. It bore a name tag, faded but just barely legible, C. Vargo. She ran it through the database of past cruise employees. The name popped up, Clinton Vargo, child psychologist, briefly contracted as a consultant for the Azure Star in 2013 and 2014. His job? Designing wellness programs for young passengers. He vanished from the cruise line records shortly after Ethan disappeared. Lena whispered, "I think we just found Zeke." She showed the sketch to Bosch and Margot. Margot stared at the face again, the stitched mouth. "Ethan was trying to warn us. He gave us the name." Lucas joined them at the table. "Then we find him. And we end this." Bosch looked over the growing pile of evidence. "This is no longer a missing persons case. This is something else entirely." That night, as rain tapped against Lena's window, a new envelope arrived at her apartment door. No return address. Inside was Ethan's favorite toy dinosaur, dirty but unmistakable, and tucked beside it, a slip of paper, handwritten, "He's almost ready." They returned to the port where it had all begun, Port Canaveral. 11 years ago, the Azure Star had left from this very harbor. Now it served as a major hub for several luxury cruise lines. But beneath the polished terminals and polished smiles lay older structures, storage yards, abandoned marinas, tunnels from when the port had military functions decades prior. Bosch had a contact with port security who gave them after-hours access. It was a gamble. But if Clinton Vargo, Zeke, had operated out of the ship, he must have had a supply route, somewhere to move in and out unnoticed. The tunnels were damp, echoing, lit only by Bosch's flashlight and Lena's portable lantern. Rusted signs in faded paint warned of hazards. The deeper they went, the older the air felt. Then they found it. Behind a partially collapsed wall, Bosch noticed airflow. She and Lucas pushed through, revealing a narrow corridor hidden for decades. It led to a chamber the size of a shipping container, reinforced with old beams and metal panels. The air was stale, but the signs were fresh, drawings, dozens of them, pinned to the walls, taped, folded, scribbled on scraps of paper. Most were by children, judging by the handwriting and style, some cheerful, others nightmarish. One depicted a series of locked doors labeled tests. Another showed a boat sinking while a figure watched from shore. Margot knelt beside a small wooden crate. Inside she found a notebook, bound in leather stained by time. Ethan's handwriting filled the pages. Each entry was dated in crayon or pencil, sometimes both. The first few were innocent, descriptions of food, strange noises, dreams of escape. But as the pages went on, the tone shifted. The entries turned darker, confused, then organized. Zeke says the others didn't listen. I'm supposed to learn faster. He says I'm special because I don't forget things. I'm not supposed to talk to the new boy. Zeke said he failed. And then, there's a way out. I just need the right time. I made a raft. If it doesn't sink, the sea will take me home. Margot's heart stopped. He tried to escape. Lucas took the notebook, his fingers trembling. Folded inside the back cover was a page torn from another book. On it, drawn in multiple layers of crayon, was a map of the Florida coastline. A red X marked a section near the beach where the suitcase had been found. Bosch whispered, "That's where the tide delivered the suitcase." Lena traced the line. He made it. Or at least his things did. Margot stood suddenly, her eyes scanning the walls. These drawings, they're not all Ethan's. She pointed to initials, AJ, SK, RF, each signed in a child's script. There were others, Lucas said softly. How many? No one had an answer. Bosch found something tucked behind a wall panel, a torn photograph of a boy with dark hair and wide eyes. On the back, Benicio, age 6. Smile more. It wasn't Ethan. They were looking at a holding chamber, a conditioning zone, a hidden place where children had been kept, taught, manipulated, used. And Zeke had made them draw it all. Lena's phone buzzed. A new message. A photo attachment. She opened it. The image showed her car from above, taken as she exited earlier that day. Another angle, another silent threat. No message, no signature, just a clear warning. She showed Bosch, who frowned. They're watching us. We need protection, Margot said. They already know where we are. Bosch nodded. Then we speed up. They gathered everything they could, drawings, the notebook, the map. Bosch would take them straight to Agent Gray. This was now more than evidence. It was testimony, a confession written in fear and color. As they left the chamber, Lena heard footsteps behind them, faint, deliberate. She turned, light flashing across empty stone. No one. That night, back at Margot's home, a package waited on the doorstep. No postmark, no label. Inside was Ethan's plastic lunchbox, green with blue latches, faded but intact. Margot opened it slowly. Inside, a sealed bag containing a cloth scrap from Ethan's old shirt, a cracked pencil, and a folded page torn from the diary. The message was clear. It read, "He was brave. But the sea is bigger." And beneath that, 3 drawn symbols, a crescent moon, a key, and an eye. Margot's fingers curled around the paper. He's close. Bosch said nothing. Because the symbols weren't just cryptic, they were instructions. The evidence was overwhelming. The drawings, the diary, the photos, the audio recordings, each piece a puzzle locked in time. Bosch delivered everything to Agent Gray, who escalated the case to the highest priority. Within days, federal agents mobilized. A task force was dispatched. A break came when a retired employee from the cruise line called Bosch privately. He'd seen Lena's article, recognized the name Clinton Vargo, said Vargo had been dismissed quietly. No incident report, just a severance check and a confidentiality agreement. But there was one thing the man remembered. Vargo had purchased property in the Bahamas. A small island, private, off-grid. The FBI obtained satellite footage, one small cabin barely visible through dense palm cover. A dock, no boats. They moved fast. Bosch, Margot, Lucas, Lena, and a federal unit boarded a black helicopter at sunrise. The flight was tense. Margot stared silently out the window, her hands clenched in her lap. Lucas kept his eyes on the map, tracking the flight path. Lena clutched her recorder but didn't turn it on. The island came into view, lush, isolated, ringed with shallow reefs. They landed half a mile out on a neighboring islet, crossing by inflatable raft to avoid alerting anyone. The team split. Agents surrounded the perimeter, while Bosch led Margot and Lucas through the forest trail, marked on the satellite image. The cabin emerged like a ghost, wooden, sun-bleached, with patched windows and a crooked porch. There were toys scattered in the sand, and drawings. Dozens of them, pinned to trees fluttering in the breeze. Margot spotted one immediately, Ethan's name in the corner. They approached, a creak, then a voice from inside. "Don't shoot!" Bosch froze. "Come out. Hands up." A man stepped into the doorway. Clinton Vargo, thinner than in the records, hair long, face lined by the sun. He held his hands in the air. "I'm unarmed," he said. "You're just in time, he's inside." Margot pushed past everyone. She ran through the door before anyone could stop her. Inside, a boy sat at a wooden table, sketching. He looked up slowly, pencil still in hand. He was older, taller, hair longer. But the eyes, those bright, wide eyes, were unmistakable. "Ethan!" Margot choked. The boy stared. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Then slowly he nodded. "Mom?" She crossed the room in a heartbeat, pulling him into her arms. He didn't resist. He trembled. Lucas arrived moments later. "Ethan." "Dad," the boy said quieter. "You came." The agents moved in and cuffed Vargo. He didn't struggle. He looked at Bosch and smiled. "I kept him safe," he said. "He was never hurt." "You stole his life," Bosch growled. Vargo tilted his head. "No, I gave him purpose. You'll see. He's not the same." They dragged him away. Lena remained outside, documenting everything in silence. The drawings swayed in the wind, some new, some clearly years old. One showed Ethan building a raft. Another depicted a cage with the door open. Inside, Ethan sat with Margot, still stunned, still unsure. "I didn't think you'd find me," he whispered. "We never stopped," she said. "Not for a single day." Lucas crouched beside them. "We're here now. You're coming home." Ethan blinked. "Is that still real?" Margot hugged him tighter. "It always was." The agents secured the area. Ethan was medically cleared, malnourished but stable. His mental state would take time, but he recognized them. Remembered his name, knew who he was. Bosch spoke to him gently. "Do you know why he kept you?" Ethan hesitated. Then, "He said I could draw the things others couldn't, that I remembered too much. He said I wasn't ready, but I was close." "Close to what?" Ethan's eyes darkened. "To becoming like him." Bosch felt her stomach twist. "He tried to make you forget who you were," she said. Ethan nodded. "But I wrote it down every day so I wouldn't lose myself." Margot held the diary tightly. "You saved yourself." Back on the helicopter, Ethan sat between his parents, silent but alert. Lena sat opposite, scribbling details. Bosch spoke with the agents about extradition and federal charges. Vargo would never see freedom again. As the helicopter lifted, Ethan looked out at the shrinking island and whispered, "I don't think I was the first." Margot looked at him. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He just drew a small moon on the fogged window. The return home was quiet, discreet by design. The FBI shielded Ethan from the media frenzy, allowing the Hales a few days of silence. They stayed in a secure location, while doctors and therapists began their evaluations. Ethan barely spoke at first. His body moved with hesitation, his eyes constantly scanning rooms, windows, corners. But slowly, cracks of light appeared. He remembered Margot's lullabies, Lucas's jokes, the taste of peanut butter, the sound of rain. He wasn't the same boy who had vanished, but he wasn't lost either. Margot sat with him every night, reading aloud from books he'd loved as a child. Lucas, still learning how to be a father again, brought him notebooks and pencils. Ethan didn't speak much, but he drew, pages and pages, filling sketch pads with silent memory. His drawings told stories even he couldn't yet voice. Some were dark, others shimmered with hope. Always there was movement, arrows pointing forward, bridges crossing over shadows. Lena published her article 2 weeks after Ethan was rescued. It wasn't sensational. It was reverent, honest, and thorough. She told the story with care, protecting the boy's privacy while exposing the failings of a system that had overlooked too many like him. The story exploded worldwide. News outlets picked it up. Advocacy groups demanded reform in maritime law. International coalitions began tracking historical patterns of child disappearances on the sea, and at the center of it all, Ethan Hale. He was never shown on camera, but his art was. A gallery exhibit was organized in Miami, titled Drawn Home. It featured selected sketches recovered from the island, the ship, and Ethan's post-rescue journals. Each drawing was paired with minimal context, no details about the trauma, only the message. Visitors wept. Bosch was invited to speak on opening night. She stood before a crowd, holding the sketchpad Ethan had filled in the months after his return. "I worked this case for 11 years, she said. "I thought I'd failed, but Ethan never stopped trying to be found. He left us a path. All we had to do was believe it mattered." She stepped down to a standing ovation. Margot and Lucas, seated in the back, held hands for the first time in years. Their son was safe. They still had a long road ahead: therapy, adjustment, rebuilding trust. But the worst was over. The silence had broken. Ethan was no longer just the boy who vanished. He was the one who returned. Ethan watched a recording of the exhibit from home. He smiled faintly when he saw his favorite drawing, the one of the sea at sunset, with a figure walking across a bridge of stars. "That was the one I made the day before I ran," he said. Margot kissed his forehead. "You drew your way back," he nodded. "I had to." The FBI closed its case with multiple charges against Clinton Vargo and 2 former cruise line executives complicit in covering up his activity. More arrests followed in the months ahead as new victims were identified. Some families, like the Hales, finally received answers. Others remained in limbo, their children never found. Bosch retired for good after the final trial. But she kept one of Ethan's drawings on her desk at home, a reminder that not all endings are endings. Lena moved on to her next investigation, but nothing ever hit as hard as Ethan's story. She knew it would stay with her forever. She received a hand-drawn thank you card from Ethan 6 months later. It had a sun, a tree, and a house with a heart. Inside it said, "Thank you for hearing me." And now to you watching this. If you were moved by Ethan's journey, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Stories like his remind us why we must never stop searching, never stop questioning, and never let forgotten voices stay silent. There's always another mystery, another child, another truth waiting beneath the surface. So if your heart is still with us, don't leave just yet. Click the next video on screen to discover another unbelievable story, because some truths, no matter how deeply buried, always find their way back to the light.